Thanks very much for being here at lunch, if I understand correctly. My name is Emmanuelle Schön-Quinlivan. I'm a lecturer in the Department of Government and Politics with Fiona, who's organised this conference. I'm sorry I couldn't be here this morning. I had another event across campus, but I'm delighted that I was asked to chair this panel discussion. Fiona, over the years, has organised fantastic gender-focused conferences, and I have always learnt a lot through those conferences and become more aware, actually, of certain issues. So it's a real pleasure to be here. Now, we have, for the discussion, we have Professor Louise Chappell. I think those Professor Louise Chappell, we have a series of professors. Professor Yvonne Galligan, Professor Georgina, Waylen, and Professor Fiona Mackay. I think you know them all since they were there this morning. Professor Chris Williams is the newcomer for this afternoon, and he is the head of the College of Arts, Celtic Studies and Social Science at UCC since September 2017. Before that, he worked in the universities of Cardiff, Swansea and Glamorgan. He's, from background, he's a historian, and he's published on subjects including the history of the British Labour Party, on local politics in Britain, and on devolution. He currently teaches British history through caricature and political cartoons, and I've heard him discuss it a little bit at a small conference that was organised here, and it was fascinating. So the way this panel is going to work, each contributor is going to speak maybe for 10 minutes about their career advice and the journey. We're still all on it, from PhD to professor. They've arrived. We're not there yet. And after those 10 minutes, we'll take questions and answers from the floor, if that's okay. Okay, please, Louise, will you start? We'll go in order from the...
Okay. Thank you so much, Emmanuelle. So I suppose I want to start where Fiona sort of was talking this morning about being grateful to the generation that went before me, because I actually think I've had a very privileged career, but only because I really recognised there were people there before me that pushed the boundaries. When I started, I think there was one professor of political science in Australia, Marion Saw, who's still very active in the field. But now there are many of us, and it's largely because of the work that went on. So Fiona and I were talking about this yesterday afternoon, and I'm going to sort of follow her lead and talk about my career in a nutshell, just to situate myself, as a good feminist always does. Then to talk about how to manage a career in a greedy institution, and Fiona's done work on greedy institutions, and I think that's exactly where we live. Advice that I found helpful, and advice that I want to give. So I left school in 1984, and I didn't do terribly well in my leaving certificates at all, actually. I was too busy breaking up with my boyfriend in the middle of the exams and not really working terribly hard. But I lived in a university town that gave scholarships to local students to try and encourage that. So I was a beneficiary in that sense of being able to get to university, even though I wasn't able to really crack the big time. But I left my hometown for a while first, went and got a job working as a debt collector for a telecommunications company at the time. Saved up enough money to go and meet my sister overseas, and came travelling to Ireland and across Europe and all sorts of things, and then went back and did my undergrad degree majoring in political science. And I thought I was going to be a historian, actually. I really loved history, but politics kept calling me back, and there was something about my background. My father was our local parliamentary member, different side of politics to me, but nevertheless. And so I got an honours degree, and I worked really hard and ended up with a first in my honours degree. So that then opened up the door to me to wherever I wanted to go. And I thought initially I wanted to go and work in the bureaucracy and work in policy, so I went to the New South Wales Cabinet Office and worked there for 18 months and just became incredibly disillusioned and bored, actually. And so I applied for a job as a research assistant at Sydney University. And I started there, and then thought that that would be my route into doing a PhD, which indeed it was. So did my PhD there, and I did it within the sort of usual 4-year time frame. Started teaching, and I was really encouraged and mentored at that time by a wonderful person. A lot of you may know is Deborah Brennan, who's been a fantastic mentor throughout my career. And just as I was finishing my PhD, a job came open in the department, which I was persuaded initially not to go for. And I just thought, well, I'm as qualified as anyone else, so let me see. But my area of women's studies didn't really fit what they were looking for. But I applied, and I didn't get the job. It was given to a very smart young man who also applied at the same time for Stanford, and he got the job at Stanford. And so the opening, and I was the next listed. And so that just sort of taught me, my first lesson is just throw your hat in the ring. You never ever know what's going to happen, especially with academic jobs. You just never know. So I spent 19 years at Sydney from the time I sort of started my PhD to the time I left. In that time, I had 2 babies, one in 2003 and one in 2006, and I took a 6-month mat leave for the first and a 12-month mat leave for the second. And at that time, when I was leaving, I was just finished my second period of maternity leave, and the Australian government had opened this new scheme called a Future Fellowship, which is 4 years of research funding, no teaching, academic nirvana. And so I went to my head of department and I said, I want to apply for this. And he said, kidding? They want distinguished people. They want people. And I said, well, my book did win the American Political Science Association. He said, but Louise, it's women in politics. And I'm like, oh. About 2 weeks later, I got a call from the university across the way saying, do you be interested if we put you forward? Like, we're looking for people, because this was the first round. And I was like, yes, please. And I got it. And when I went back to tell my other colleagues, they're like, really? You? Like, this was really... And then they made disparaging remarks about the university I was going to and whatever. And it's been the best move I've ever made, I've got to say, and have ended up in a very happy place in the law faculty there, having moved from politics to run my own institute. But I work with a colleague now. She says, you've always got to bring your full self to work. So in that vein, I've also had breast cancer twice. Once knocked me out for 6 months. The last lot in 2017 knocked me out for 12 months. And I think that also taught me a lesson, is just be open and honest with people about what's going on in your life. You need to do it with kids. You need to do it with other caring responsibilities, but you also need it when there's those other things happening. And everyone came to support me. So when I ran out of sick leave, people all over the place sort of supported me and found ways to make it work. So I suppose I've been very fortunate in that way too, is that I haven't been kicked out of the door, which I know some people actually do lose their jobs when they suffer a sort of a serious illness. So how to manage a career in a greedy institution? I think the first thing I would say is that just recognise the university will not put boundaries on the amount of work that you should be doing. They will let you work 24/7 every week of the year. So it's up to you, essentially. You've got to corral your time, and that can be really hard because I think we're a type. We're a type of person that is usually very diligent, very wanting to contribute and all that sort of stuff. And if you don't put your own boundaries around, no one else is going to do it for you. Be honest with yourself and your managers about your workload and the need for that work-life balance, especially when things come out of the blue, like illnesses and whatever, and keep letting them know where you're at. Use your appraisals and your evaluations and so on to do that. Service roles, we're all good people doing these sorts of things, and I've tried to duck and weave as much as I can, but sometimes get caught up. And I also want to be a good citizen, so I've taken my roles when I've needed to, but I haven't gone looking for them in between time. I would say with great emphasis, just get over your imposter syndrome. Just get over it, because where's it going to get you? Nowhere, really. And even if you have to pretend. So I've pretended, and very early on I had a male colleague the same stage as me. His name was Jason, and I just have asked myself all the way through my career, what would Jason do? And Jason has got me a long way. Jason doesn't know he's my Jason. But I've given Jason away now because I think I'm free of Jason. But for a really long time, I would write grants as if it was Jason writing his grant. None of this hide your light under a bushel, say, I'm the best thing in the world, because that's what everyone else was saying and doing, and that's who you're sort of competing with. So find a Jason, and hopefully now there's sort of some Justines and some others that have done it that you can put them on your shoulders too. Jason, however, still remains childless and whatever, and I feel like I now feel like I've overtaken Jason, because I've managed a range of other challenges that he's never had to do, but we're about par now, Simon. Advice I found helpful: put effort into applying for research grants, because they really give you a level of protection in your work. I make them a priority, actually, and I've benefited from that, and I've really had a very fulfilling career because I've had the opportunity to have those grants. And it is a vicious or a virtuous circle. The more you get, the more you get, the less you get. So you just, again, be in it to win it. Find them, look for them, go after them, whatever they are, because they'll build your CV. Don't waste your PhD, publish it as a book. You won't ever have as much time as you have when you're writing that PhD, and it's a piece of gold in terms of your career, and get it out. I would say adopt a 2-track journal publishing strategy. I don't have to live under the regime of the ref, thank God, but we've got metrics. But I always publish to my people and the people I want to read my work, but I've also got an eye on, you know, those high quality journals, blah, blah. If you find yourself really squeezed for time, which we all do, just still keep writing. Half an hour is better than none. An hour is better than none. You know, put some time away, because the minute you stop doing that, the harder it is to get back to it. And I hate having a blank page. At least if I've got some notes there, I can do it. So the advice I want to give is find your tribe, support, guidance, intellectual companionship, and life-fulfilling opportunities abound. And I found my tribe with my feminist institutionalist friends, and it's really been made my career so fulfilling and wonderful. Jump on board opportunities when they arise, and you just don't know where they're going to take you. If they start taking you somewhere you don't want to go, just jump off. You know, and that can be done. Amplify the work of people coming up from below you, younger scholars, and the fantastic work they do. Don't be afraid to ask for what you want. I found the worst thing that can happen is someone will say no. They might also say you're too big for your boots, like whatever. I don't really care, but they'll just say no. So you go, okay, well, at least I tried. Increasingly, this is my new mantra, call out bad behaviour and bad decisions at the university level and everywhere else. I can do that as a prof now. I understand you can't always do that, but in the era of Me Too and everything else, I've just had enough. I've absolutely had enough. And if I see something that I don't agree with, I will definitely call it out. And people then have come to me and supported me in all sorts of ways because I've started to do that. And ignore anyone who tells you you have to work harder than men to achieve. Seriously, I was at a event for women, young women researchers recently, and one of the senior women in the university just basically said, lean in harder. Like, you just have to work hard. And there was almost like a riot in the room. So I could say it's just nonsense. You cannot ask anyone to work harder than they already are. So I'm sorry if I've gone over time.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Lily and Yvonne.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. So my career and my advice, I guess, is where I'm going to bring this to. So I think probably as one goes on, you will find that, in fact, the careers that we appear to have, certainly that I appear to have, is not the career that I started out with. And there are many, many paths into and staying in academia, and all of them bring their own richness. And in fact, one of the strengths, somebody asked me earlier today, how the hell have you managed to stay in academia? And I have stayed there because I know what it's like outside of academia. I'd much rather be in academia.
Absolutely.
And I also know how hard I fought to get here. So just to give you a little bit of background, obviously I'm an Irish woman, and I was born in Donegal and grew up in the countryside. Quite an idyllic childhood. Spent my life on the beach, unfortunately not Australian weather, but still spent my life on the beach. I never mind rain. And enjoyed it. But sometimes the weather was so bad that you couldn't go to the beach. It just was too bad to go to the beach. And then I turned to reading because, you know, in the wilds of Donegal there wasn't much going on there. It was long before internet, it was even before television. Well, maybe it was in the cities but not elsewhere. And I remember having, I told this story to Fiona recently. I remember having finished reading every single thing in the house. There was only one thing left to read, and that was the Pears Medical Cyclopedia. So I was 9 years of age, and I started on the A's, read through the A's. Started on the B's, then went through the B's. Started on the C's, and got as far as conception, which fascinated me. I didn't understand the word. I really did not, but this fascinated me. This was medical language. It wasn't written for children. And went into school the following day. And of course, I lived in an all-Irish speaking area. So in my best Irish, I told all my friends that we were all born as a result of intercourse, which I just did not understand either. And as a consequence, there was major consternation among my parents and adults around. My parents were deathly embarrassed for a long time afterwards, and not surprisingly, my reading was censored. So I never got further than the C's. But I think, you know, in my own little 9-year-old mind, I think I became curious. Why did this provoke such a reaction? What's the problem here? It's just knowledge, for goodness sakes. And I think that kind of, I wouldn't call it an insight, but a kind of an early understanding of the joy of knowledge and the power of knowledge, for good or for bad, actually stayed with me all through my life, and still does. And it also taught me that later, as a grown woman, during the 1980s, when I was very involved in the 8th Amendment, and so I was involved in the side that did not want to put the 8th Amendment into the Constitution, and I was, it was really at the very sharp end of political and social divisions in Irish society. And at that time, Dublin City Library banned from its shelves the book Our Bodies, Ourselves. And, you know, it struck me at that time that some knowledge is dangerous. And that became really something that I couldn't get out of my mind. Why should some knowledge be dangerous? And I've always looked at knowledge in that way. What is its power, and how can we use the power of knowledge to achieve change in either our societies or in the way things are perceived, or in shaping and defining the paradigm, the current paradigm of understanding. And I think so that's been part and parcel of my life. Now, in the 1980s, I had been a primary school teacher. I still was. I had 2 children, and I was working full time, and I had done my primary degree and my master's degree by night time, because again, this curiosity just kept driving me onwards. And a little bit like Louise, I did a degree in history and politics. Loved the history, but found it very difficult to find a place in the history department. Loved the politics, and found that to be a more open space and a space for more inquiry, and followed that track. Then went and signed up for a PhD in Trinity College, and was able to take that on because I won a scholarship, a Trinity College Award. And you know, there are just small moments in your life that actually make a difference, and that actually made a huge difference to me, because it said to me, the message was, you are able to do this. You might have been out of education for 10, 12 years at this stage, but you are able to go back in, and we believe in you. That's what that told me. Paid my fees, gave me a small stipend. I took a risk and gave up my job, and then did some part-time work in various places to earn more money, but basically to give me the time to write and to research. So I did, and I wrote a book and a PhD turned into a book on the women's movement, the second wave women's movement, and its influence on Irish public policy. So after that, spent some time as a contract staff member in Trinity College, until UCC rescued me from that position. And I came here to work in the Department of Government and Politics. And Neil was my first academic boss. And thoroughly enjoyed it. Made so many wonderful friends who are here today. So many of you. And it was such a vibrant and great place to be. Queen's then were setting up the Centre for Advancement of Women in Politics, and said, would you like to come? Would you like to interview for it? So after a lot of soul searching, I said, okay, I'll interview for it. Went to Queen's and stayed there for 18 years. Now, the really interesting thing along the way is that to get to that point in time, I would say I had 3 really important people. One of them was Elizabeth Meehan, who thoroughly and completely supported me all through my career, from the minute she read my PhD, because she was my external examiner.
She's mine.
And she was yours. And a more affirming person could not get, but who could also gently tell you where you were going wrong at the same time, which is the kind of mentor you want, you know. The second vital person to me at that point in getting to that stage was Fiona, my dear friend, Alice Brown, who herself was an outstanding scholar and foundational in the study of women in politics in Scotland, and she has always been a constant through my career as well. And the third person was was an academic who was also a broadcaster by the name of Brian Farrell. And Brian Farrell came along at two critical moments in my life and said, it's okay, Yvonne, you're going to get through this. And I did. And it was thanks to his support that I got through that. One thing that he said you're going to have to get through was chucking me out of UCD and sending me to Trinity to do my PhD. So that took a little bit of time in adjusting. And you mentioned the imposter syndrome, Louise. When you've been out of academia for as long as I had been, you forget how to think analytically. And so I had to relearn how to think with a critical mind all over again. And I don't know if anybody in the room is doing this, but if you are doing it, you can do it. Because I have done that, and I have been through that process. And it was not necessarily preordained that I would end up in academia, but I knew that I would not be happy anywhere else, and so I did. And over the course of the 18 years in Queen's, I had an incredibly happy time there, but I was faced with challenges. And some of the challenges were about the informal rules and the informal norms of the organisation. So it took me 3 attempts to become head of school. And you might think, why the hell do you want to be a head of school? Are you mad one? I knew it was a gatekeeping role. I studied party politics. I knew being a head of school was like being a candidate. You know, it's that kind of role. You're then considered for further things. Your opportunities and your horizons open. It took me 3 times. Not because I wasn't good enough each time, but because there were other things at play that I had no control over. And there were other machines and wheels on there. It took me 3 times for my application for promotion to full professor to be accepted. And again, same thing, not because I wasn't good enough. I was doing more than ticking all the boxes. I was doing more than proving myself. But again, there were things that I could not manage, could not control happening. And so I think my advice is don't give up. Keep at it. It's not going to fall into your lap. It's going to be hard work. But once you know why you're there and that you love doing it, then it will come about. Whatever it is that you want comes about. Sometimes I think my own sense of duty and my sense of obligation has been something that has held me back in some ways. And I would say, yes, have a sense of duty and obligation, but don't have it completely shape how you perceive your role to be. So in my new role, although I have a very big brief, one of the things that I have insisted in negotiating that role is that I keep a research track related to my studies. And that is, as you say, vital. Because that's why we're there. It's about knowledge and it's about design. So keep on trying, keep on writing, and don't give up, and value your mentors. Because they're really great support.
Thank you very much. And actually, Yvonne gave me my first job when I arrived from France. Yes, absolutely, in January 2000. Fiona?
Right, thanks very much indeed. So I'll keep on the same kind of framework. It's my career in a nutshell. I think this is a theme coming through. I'm also something of an accidental academic. I was an adult returner to higher education. I left school at 18. I became a croupier for a while. Very glamorous in Newcastle upon Tyne. And then I served an apprenticeship as a local journalist. What is that? What's a croupier? It's Work in a casino worker.
Oh.
Yeah, blackjack, roulette, that sort of thing. Gambling. My mum still doesn't know that's what I did. I wore a toga, because it was the Tiberius. I wore a toga and gold sandals.
Gold sandals. Oh my God.
Yeah, okay. So 10 years later, in the late 1980s, I went to Manchester University to read politics and modern history. Again, I didn't realise that we had all that in common. And then after a short break, I went on and did a PhD at Edinburgh University. Motivated, at least in part, by the belief that as a single mother of a then 4-year-old, academia seemed to offer better prospects for work-life balance than returning to my old career in the media. And I know what you're all thinking, but it's all relative. In 1996, I finished my PhD at Edinburgh, and I took up a position on a research project, an ESRC research project as a named postdoc. In 1997, I got my first lectureship. It wasn't actually a permanent lectureship in those days, it was a real hiring freeze days. It was a temporary lectureship for 3 years, and then it was eventually made permanent. It wasn't a gender job, there weren't any gender jobs in those days. To 2003, I was promoted to senior lecturer, by which time I had 3 books, had been the PI of a major ESRC grant, and in 2012, I was made personal chair. And to echo Yvonne, I don't know if you've heard of the CV of failures that people are now talking about, that what we should do is we should be showing all the nasty bits that happen rather than it'll look like a seamless career. So I was promoted, I took 2 goes to each stage of promotion. I think, like a lot of feminist scholars, you want the chance, it's Sarah Harding that talks about feminism and feminist academic work being about creating useful knowledge and knowledge for change. And it was a really exciting time to be in Scotland in the 1990s, inspired by my supervisor, Alice Brown, who Yvonne talked about, and who I met Yvonne. She was one of the feminist architects of devolution. So she worked very closely with feminists across Ireland, north and south, across Scotland and Wales. That's how I first met Yvonne, around women's political representation, about how to design institutions from the outset that were more likely to be inclusive, equal and just. And it always felt incredibly privileged to be able to work across that politics, policy, movement intersection. Although, to be fair, it hasn't counted in career terms until relatively recently. So I think it's the one good thing about the impact agenda now makes that work legible in the sense that for many years it was seen as really, I think, rather illegitimate and biased, although with the support of somebody like Alice Brown, you just went ahead and did it anyway. The shape that my career took from the point of that first promotion in 2003 has been from accidental to proactive leader, and I think Yvonne and I have similar experiences. So immediately I was made director of our large graduate school, deputy director rather, eventually director of that graduate school, and then from 2014 to 2017 I was dean and head of the School of Social and Political Science, which is one of the largest in the UK. I'm currently director of Gender Ed, which is a kind of interdisciplinary hub trying to bring together all the scholarship that exists across a comprehensive university like the University of Edinburgh around gender and sexuality studies, and I'm honorary secretary of the PSA, along with Yvonne, who's honorary treasurer. So around 15 years or so, I've had an internal focus, and I've had quite a large leadership focus. Working with other people, again, and we've talked about this already today, to try and affect small wins, often to try and least worst outcomes sometimes rather than small wins, and to try and nudge, if you like, the institution towards more inclusive professional cultures around sort of paying attention to things like the importance of work-life balance and so on. So it's been a very particular route. It's been a leadership route, part pushed, part purposive, and it's brought some challenges and dilemmas. So the first challenge for me has been how to keep up momentum on research. Inevitably, less time, there's much less in my CV in terms of quantity, but I think I've kept things going in part through collaboration, co-working, co-authoring and networking. Finn has been an incredibly important network to me, both professionally and personally, and at least two of the people on the podium with me have been very good at setting me deadlines and being quite patient when I've broken them repeatedly. There's also been the issue about keeping up momentum on teaching and learning. I'm really keen on teaching. I think that some of the most important experiences have been through teaching, through PhD supervision and so on. And again, I've done that through team teaching and through collaboration. It's also been quite satisfying as an academic manager to be able, again, to use your institutional position to spot where the openings are, what Jane Mansbridge calls institutional readiness, where you, in your position as an academic manager, can push forward feminist classrooms, can push forward gender courses and so on. So I think there have been both advantages and disadvantages to having a career which has been both uneven and compressed. I'm going to miss out the bit about the neoliberal university because we all know. And move on to, I think there are kind of three sets of strategies. So one is personal strategies of survival in the greedy institution. For me, I would highlight the importance of networks, peer support, support from mentors, and finding sponsors. So there's mentors will kind of go there. Sponsors will say, get out there, go for that. And you need a mixture of the two things. And you need to have a sponsor who's in the rooms you aren't in, saying, have you thought about asking so-and-so to do this, that, and the other? I think you need to make your own decisions about the direction and pace of your career over the long haul. It's worth choosing to work at places that take equality and diversity seriously and make it clear to university managers that's a reason that you're staying or going. And then there are a setting of collective strategies, because we don't always have those sorts of choices over our careers and where we go. And it's already been raised a number of times, but I mean, one of the crucial things is that women are, in general, far less mobile than their male counterparts. I don't think it's any, it's not a coincidence that all of us have spent very long periods of time in particular institutions, particularly as our kids were growing up. So I think if you are where you are, then there are a whole set of collective strategies about being part of the collective lobbying in your institution, to call out your institution, but also to take forward constructive suggestions about what we need for livable lives. And I'm struck again at the Audre Lorde quote that I was trying to think about, and it's something about self-care is feminist. I think it's maybe self-care is feminist and revolutionary. And we do need to think about self-care as part of that. And then I think these outsider within strategies that we've already spoken about today, I think we should take leadership and decision-making roles seriously and get in there in order to shape and influence developments. The advice I found most helpful over my career are to take opportunities, you first have to seek them and make them, or make them. So my first job as a postdoc after a PhD was in an ESRC funded project that I played a really substantial role in developing. It knocked my PhD submission off course by 3 or 4 months, but it put me on the first rung of the ladder. And I suppose a sub-theme of the perennial question of when to say yes and when to say no, I mean, it is a really difficult one. I think that what I would say is I think you should recognise the opportunities of service. There's a lot of advice about the negatives, which I won't rehearse here, but some of the positives around visibility, around making connections you wouldn't ordinarily make, including horizontal connections, about institutional learning and getting that kind of savvy, collegiality in relationships, potential mentors and sponsors. The best bit of advice I was given was, if there's a job with your name written on it that you think you might be able to dodge, but actually somebody's got you in their sights, either in an institution or a disciplinary body or wherever else, if they really want you, don't say no. Say yes and negotiate hard. Tell them what you need to do that job well and for your career to progress. And I've done well using that strategy. So it could be training, it could be coaching and mentoring, it could be compensatory research leave, it could be having research support, and so on. My advice, including several bits I've never managed to follow myself, network, network, network. When I first set out as a single parent of a young child, I couldn't do that bit. I couldn't go to it's the bit I couldn't really do. And it took me quite a few years to catch up. You really need your networks to develop collaborations, to increase your profile, so that others consider you in the future as a potential collaborator. You need to exploit your specialist networks, but also make networks within your institution, make networks within your school, and make networks with externals, NGOs, civil society groups, and so on. I think that multiple networks help you to build and sustain a well-rounded academic career. Again, to pick up on a point that said, nevertheless, she persisted. So it is about learning from our failures, from the articles rejected, the proposals unfunded, the jobs and fellowships missed. And balance, we've already talked about that. It's really hard to do, but do think about that, including the times when the rest of life is more important to you than your academic career. And don't be afraid of that. So my conclusions, learn the rules of the game, don't always play by them. Take opportunities and make opportunities. Learn to say no strategically and judiciously, recognise when to say yes, proactively and with clear asks. But most of all, be yourself. I think academic careers need planning over the long haul. You need to pace yourself according to the context in which you find yourself, including the rest of your life. Thank you.
Brilliant. Georgina, will you?
Well, thank you to everyone. A lot of what I'm going to say, I think, is just really going to echo what's already been said. But I think for me, one of the things I find very, very striking is how much things have changed since I started out. I graduated with a degree in politics and economics in 1981 and started a PhD in 1983. So perhaps the earliest of everyone on this table. I don't know. Yeah. And I think in many ways things are much better for women than they were in the early 80s, you know, unbelievably so, certainly in the UK, but in many ways things are much worse. I think really for all early career researchers, male and female, I think there are certain pressures now that just did not exist. You know, in the early 80s we had other pressures, but you know, we didn't have the ref. So my experience of being a PhD student in ECR, I got my first temporary lecturing job in 88, and not that relevant to today. And I think one of the big changes is academia is much more professionalised now. There are far more formal rules, and I think that has advantages and disadvantages, and I think there's much less, to my mind, of the obvious, overt, explicit discrimination that was there in the 1980s, and there's much more redress, there's much more capacity to call it out, you know, as Louise was saying. So I think the kind of things that we women in academia witnessed in the 80s, or the things I experienced in the 80s, just would not happen now. Being the only woman on being interviewed, all the others were men, no one speaking to you at the lunch. I did get the job. But one of the members of the department saying to me, of course all the department were men, there were no women in the department, like, well, I said to them beforehand, you can't appoint the woman, I will not have you appoint the woman. But actually you're not too bad. I can tell you this now, because you're all right. I was the first woman in the department I was working in to have maternity leave. When I came back, I was due sabbatical, but I was told, well, you've had so much time off already, you can't possibly have a sabbatical because, you know, you've been off. Yeah, what do you think we've been doing? And also, I mean, I agree with you about being open about personal things, but I have lupus. I was diagnosed in the early 80s. For the first few years, I had to be really careful because I just feared that I would lose my job. But I could not be open about
I think that's one of the changes.
Yeah. And I think New Labour in the UK made a huge difference with all their equalities legislation. It really changed things, and I actually, maybe because of the sort of experience of the pre and post New Labour legislation, actually see advantages in things like Athena Swan, that there are these formal rules that give you the capacity to say, or things that have been put in the institutional statement, because it has to be written to make sure that there are things that you can then go back to and go, look, it says here that we're going to do this. You can actually use that. And now with REF, with an emphasis in the UK on equality and diversity, all these policies are suddenly appearing in my school about caring costs for people with dependents when they go to conferences. Oh my goodness, and it's about REF, it's about looking good in the REF environment statement and not losing out. So those things do make a difference. I had similar experiences around promotion. I had to put myself in for promotion. My department wouldn't do that. When it got to the university level, someone on the committee said to me, I looked at the 3 CVs, the 2 women, the 1 man, the 2 women, 2 men and 1 woman. The only difference between your CV and their CVs was that you were a woman and they were men. And actually, to be fair, the university committee overruled the department, which didn't make me very popular in the department. So I didn't care by that time.
The Andrew story.
Oh yeah, that's right. When I did my inaugural lecture,
Which I was at.
I did mention that we had more men called Andrew in the department than we had women. And that was in 2008 or 9, yeah. Anyway, so I think for me, I think things have got better, certainly in terms of the formal dimensions. But what I would say is that it leaves, as everyone's saying, the informal dimensions, the implicit bias, the harder to spot things, the harder to challenge things are much more in place. And so in some ways it's more challenging to have to deal with those things, how to play them, what's required, how to navigate the structures, and the sort of agentic aspect of how to be really that balancing act between what to accept and what to challenge, which is kind of what everyone's been talking about really. And I think the 2 things I would stress that are really important, which are exactly the same as everyone else has been stressing, is firstly how to deal with failure and rejection, because that's an inevitable part of such a kind of individualistic profession where you have to put yourself out there, and a very competitive one. And I had an example recently because I'm in a different institution now to the one I was in for a long time that was horrendous. We had some PhD progression meetings, and a senior female colleague commented to me about, in her experience, how differently male and female PhD students reacted to a tough progression meeting. That almost invariably the men were just like, yeah, certainly on the surface, didn't seem that bothered, and the women almost always felt undermined, that they should give up their PhDs, the whole imposter syndrome, I shouldn't really be here. So I think that is a really important thing to be aware of. And even at senior levels, I've recently sat on a professorial pay committee where professors put in for rises. And again, the gender differences that was so striking. Even at the senior level, there were 2 men from my department, so I knew what they were sort of total bullshit. It's kind of like, I single-handedly have done X and Y and Z. I know perfectly well that you haven't, but they would blatantly say that. And the female ones were like, I haven't put in for a rise since 2010. And could I just have 1 small increment, even though I'm on a ref panel, I've done this and that and the other, and it was that stark. I'm, exaggerating, but only slightly. It was so stark. So I think it's that thing. You have to put yourself out there, as everyone else has been saying. You're going to get knocked back inevitably, but you just have to steel yourself. Was it Justin?
Jason.
Yeah, well, Jason would bounce back. And I think then secondly, the other thing is as everyone's been saying, take advice. There is a knack to things. If you're applying for research grants, work out what is wanted. Different bodies have different things that they want. tailor your application, get advice, use the advice structures in your institutions. And again, the importance of mentoring, of networks, of collaboration, horizontal and vertical, as everyone else has stressed, which have all been hugely important to me over the years. Senior female colleagues made, actually Elizabeth Meehan, she was visiting and suggested I should do a PhD, which was very influential. I mean, Johnny Love and Dusty at key moments, and some men as well. So I think there are these individualist things that we can do, which is not to say it's all about lean in, but at the same time, I think we do have to be aware of the structural issues that remain. That particularly if you're doing gender work, it is more difficult to publish in those top journals, even though I think that's an important thing that we have to do. Vivian Lowndes and Rosie Campbell are quite interesting on this because they're unusual in the sense that they're scholars who do work on gender, but they also do work that is, you know, more mainstream. And both of them say that they can see, because I suppose it's a test that we don't normally do, that they have much more trouble placing their gender stuff than they do their stuff that isn't about gender. And of course we know that, you know, women have lower journal acceptance rates, partly people have mentioned because of the subject matter, the less co-authoring, the different approach, citation rates. So women get cited less, we need to cite ourselves and other women more. We all know about student teaching evaluations, tend to favour white men, and service roles. I think there's a big debate actually to be had around service roles, because there is evidence women lose out on promotion over men because they do more service work. The department I'm in now, we're actually 50-50 in terms of gender balance. So we have obviously equal numbers of men and women, even at senior levels. But one of the things I've been noticing recently, looking round, especially after reading the men's CVs when they senior men applying for increments about the things they do that I know they don't do, worrying that we have a lot of junior women doing a lot of service work and still have some senior men not doing the jobs that they do have to the extent that certainly they claim to do. And so I have started wondering whether there is an issue around that. And was it you who said there's some evidence about women taking on roles earlier?
It's me. It's not me, it's Stephen Bates.
I'd be really interested.
But I like it, taking credit for something that Stephen's done. But yes, so basically women are taking on substantial leadership roles at a far more junior level, whereas men often wait until they've got full professorships before they become heads of department or curriculum leads or whatever.
Right, yeah.
And that's a pattern across
I'd be interested to have the reference, because as I say, it's something that I'm sort of wondering about in my own department, where we're very congratulatory about how great we're doing on gender, whether those underlying informal, implicit things mean that there's still a kind of division of labour where the women, and I've put it to my head of department, look at all these women rushing around madly, and the answer's been, oh well, they want to get promoted, that's why they're doing this stuff. It's all right, it's their choice because they're very keen to get promoted quickly, and I'm still not sure.
Research.
Or you revalue service.
Yeah,
You make sure there's that the value and the time spent on service is there.
Yeah.
We would disagree.
Yeah.
I think
I don't know.
I think we represent the whole gamut.
But I think it's
on this.
very complicated.
It is very
positives
complicated.
and negatives.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I suppose that would be honestly, think there are things that have got better and then there are things that have got worse.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Wrap up the session for us.
Last but not least.
Well, no, I genuinely do have imposter syndrome. And I think, listening to everybody contribute, I'm very conscious, in a way, of how privileged, really, and fortunate I've been in my career, because I haven't really encountered some of the the obstacles or challenges that fellow panellists have mentioned. But I'll give you a quick nutshell view. So I went to an ordinary state school, actually in the west of England, though I'm from South Wales originally, but my family were living in Wiltshire, and then went from there to Oxford and studied modern history. One of my contemporaries, I'm afraid to say, was Boris Johnson.
Oh.
He was a year below me. And it's a story I'm going to tell against myself in a way, but going to Balliol and coming out of Balliol with first class honours has been a kind of thread which has been of immense value to me, I think, in my career. Because I then went to Cardiff to do a PhD. My PhD supervisor himself had been to Balliol. I was appointed to my first lectureship at Cardiff University in 1988. I hadn't finished my PhD at that point. The VC had been to Balliol. No, actually, I know for a fact he wanted somebody else. So, and then I was in Cardiff University for about 13 years before going to the University of Glamorgan, where my former PhD supervisor had gone as a pro VC, and they headhunted me to go to the University of Glamorgan. So I moved from a Russell Group university, or what would become a Russell Group university, to a post-92 institution, which was kind of quite a bold, it was a risk in a way, but it paid off. It was a very, very happy time there. I then went to Swansea University. I was, again, lucky because I was headhunted, really. They created a post essentially with me in mind, and I was the only person shortlisted. As my friend said, you'll be disappointed if you don't get it now. So I was at Swansea for 8 years, and then a job I generally got on my own merits was head of school at Cardiff University. I went back to Cardiff in a kind of management role, and then I applied for this job and was interviewed here in March 2017. Interesting, actually applied for a job in UCC when I was a PhD student and wasn't shortlisted. So I came back, and the interview was a kind of quite a big interview, about 15 people in the room, something like that. And they went round, and there were two externals. One was Jane Olmeyer from Trinity. I think she's the chair, isn't she, of the IRC at the moment. And the other one was Sir Drummond Bone, master of And he said, everybody had to introduce themselves. He said, Drummond Bone, he said, master of a place I think you know rather well. And I said, please don't say that. And I've been here since 2017. So I suppose, I'll let that speak for itself, I think. I suppose things I would say that have been important have been the willingness, I suppose, to take risks and to run the risk of failure. And so, it could have gone wrong. Could have gone wrong by making the choice to go to the University of Glamorgan, because not that it's not a good institution in many ways, and there's some great people there, but it probably wouldn't have been the place I would have wanted to have ended up. And you never know how things are going to turn out. And then other things that sort of happened, which I probably couldn't have predicted, was that when I was at Swansea, I was offered the opportunity to edit the diaries of the actor Richard Burton, which wasn't really kind of something that I was planning on doing, because I had plans for a monograph on something completely different. But I decided to do it, and it was, it was a phenomenal experience, and it gave me the kind of confidence then to go for the job in Cardiff. And then obviously having done that job for a while, I thought, well, some people have said perhaps you ought to look at pro VC type jobs, and thought I'll give it a go. So, and obviously you're running the risk of failure and disappointment, and I didn't really expect to get this job. I really didn't. And I said to my wife, I said, don't worry. I said, we're going to buy a new kitchen on the weekend. I said, there's no way they're going to give me this job, And then as I drove home from Heathrow Airport that night, I was kind of overcome by a wave of terror. Oh my God, am I really going to take this job and move everybody, the family here, which obviously we did. But I was very lucky, actually, because most of my career was in South Wales. I was able to work in those 3 different institutions without moving people around, you know. And the big disruption then was a couple of years ago when we all moved here, and my wife's career, at least temporarily, was stopped. She's a social worker and she's about to go back to work now. But you know, that was obviously a major decision to take about that. In terms of key things that have helped me, I mean, I think I would echo an awful lot of what's been said by colleagues here. I think having mentorship is really important. Actually, the reason I took 13 years to go from being appointed at Cardiff to becoming a senior lecturer was down really to a lack of clear mentorship. So I didn't really know what I was doing with publications, you know, and to some extent that's always, I think, been a bit of a legacy for me subsequently, that I didn't make certain moves early in my career that would have positioned me for a different kind of career, in terms of sort of, if you like, you know, my ideal job obviously would be to be a research professor, doing my own history, being left alone to do that. That's simply not possible given my profile. So I ended up, because I kind of found if I wasn't bad at doing the management side, drifting into that instead, and enjoying it, you know. I mean, to be genuine, I do enjoy it, and it's a really nice place here to work as well. So that's, but yeah, mentoring I think is important. People have talked about sponsors, people who will help you, think of you when opportunities come up, mention you to others. And the other thing, I suppose, certainly to younger colleagues, would be to say, you know, get involved, networking, but also kind of service to the discipline. I did a lot of work with sort of professional associations and editing work. You know, sometimes that goes under the radar a bit when it comes to promotion decisions, but actually in terms of building goodwill and a reputation as somebody who you can work with, that's very helpful. Sometimes those things come back, I think, to benefit you personally later on, even if you don't see the rewards initially. So I suppose those are the really key things for me. But I think it is about taking the opportunities, you know, and not being terrified. Because I mean, you know, I frankly was fairly terrified of many of those opportunities, but you know, you've got to kind of conquer those fears and put yourself out there, and if things come off, then you know, you kind of grow into roles as well, don't you? Even if you start off thinking, you know, from when you get your first lectureship and you stand up in front of your first group of undergraduates and think, are they really listening to me talk about this? Even down to today, you know, you're always trying to challenge and push yourself.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we have about 15 minutes for questions. So I'll take questions from the floor.
Would you also say comments as well? I
Oh,
mean, so that people can
comments.
talk about their experiences as well.
Yes, absolutely. Comments and questions.
So Fiona asked me to tell you just a very brief comment. So we mentioned this morning about the PSAI and academic institutions and how they can help you. So the first thing I would say is I was told not to go for the 2 jobs I've had since my PhD. So if you're a PhD student, do not listen to people who tell you that it's too far advanced in your career, just apply for it. But the current job that I have, I partially got because I was the graduate student rep on the PSAI during my PhD, and it meant that I met David Farrell. So I did my PhD in DCU, he was head of school in UCD. UCD was where I wanted to be long term. So when the Irish Research Council advertised the laureates 2 years ago now, I approached David and he knew who I was and said, if I got one of these, would you give me a job? And he said yes, because the better it was going to be under 10%, and that's my job now. That was my dream job. So I think that there's a lot more senior people who are more willing to help you than you realise if you approach them, if they know who you are, and if you're present. I don't think you always have to wait for someone to pick to mentor you. You can kind of pick a mentor, and hopefully they'll meet you halfway.
Yes?
I was very struck by what Fiona said about a livable life. Because I suppose at my age, going back to the PhD, having been a self-employed solicitor for years, and then going on into other things after 2009 and enjoying all of that, I don't think it would be possible for me to not have all the show on the road and living the fullest life while at the same time enjoying coming back to do a PhD. So I was very struck by that. I think that that's extremely important. I'm not sure if men think about this all the time, but I certainly think more and more women are, because I saw a lot of in the last number of years, including myself, which I didn't realise that I did it. I was an employed solicitor. It was time to take a partnership. Couldn't really take the partnership because I knew that I couldn't tie myself into the particular ethos or ethical attitude of the firm. So the only place I could go really was to become self-employed. And it was I was of an age where the kids were small. Who was going to let me have a little bit of freedom so I could run to the dentist and do the job, even though I had a self-employed husband as well. So we were very lucky that we could do a lot of the juggling. But going back to that, I think a livable life, a life that you flourish, and that you have diversity. I was very taken with you as well. You said you did the Richard Burton reading, because it's like a little bit of diversity that keeps you kind of happy and bopping along as you're overwhelmed, because at my age I am overwhelmed sometimes by learning a whole new language again, which is I mean, I'm back at apprentice. I don't want to be an apprentice and someone tell me what to do, but I'm willing to do that to know more. So yeah, I really liked that. Thank you very much. We had a great day. Thank you.
Mary?
Thanks very much. That was really fascinating hearing all of your different experiences. Can I ask you a specific question about travelling and the extent to which you should or should not do it? You know, is there some sort of balance to be achieved? Because networking requires a degree of travelling. And I also say it in the context of being in Cork, the second city, as opposed to not being in Dublin, and all of the challenges that brings, particularly, I suppose, for maybe political scientists like ourselves, where Dublin really is the heart of it all. But the travel takes so much time, and it detracts from all those other things you could be doing. So I'd be interested in hearing what you think about the value of travel and how you achieve some sort of balance between too much and too little.
Should the Australian answer. Oh my God, the hours I have spent on planes travelling. But I have made it a priority, and I've been fortunate to make it a priority because I've had the research funding to do that. So it is this virtuous circle I was sort of talking about. You know, I wouldn't be here today if I hadn't have put the effort in, including at one time an ECPR joint workshop session in Rennes. My little beautiful boy had burnt his arm about 2 weeks before that.
It's a little bit more.
Yeah, maybe, but he was still he had a skin graft. It was awful, and I was like, no, there's no way I'm leaving. There's absolutely no way I'm leaving. You get on a 27-hour flight to do this and do that, and my husband just said to me, "You're going. This is your job. Actually, this is your job. You have to go." And I remember writing to Fiona and said, "Oh, because you were meant to give such and such a favour or whatever." But it turned out to be the best thing I did, because it was really when we crystallised some of this feminist institutional stuff. And then got to the first ECPG conference you hosted in Belfast, and I go across the American Political Science Association as much as I can, and because I feel like you do, but sort of really large. Like, it's a huge country, but a long, long way away. And you can't just jump on the plane and go to Brussels or even go to Washington easily. Like, it's always going to be a big effort. But I must say, I've never, very rarely I'll turn around and not think it's been worthwhile. If only just to catch up with my mates and, you know, and check in with everyone. And we Skype too, and we keep in contact that way. But there's nothing like being in the same room with people. And it's been such a pleasure here. I mean, this one's very good. She's done 3 trips to Australia in the last 12 months. And Fiona, you know, was really keen to bring us here. And she's only able to do that because, you know, she's travelled to us and we're travelling back. And But I understand it's hard and it's expensive and there are those sort of caveats. But if you can manage it, I would say go for it.
I think I mentioned at the start of my career, so I think I went to an ECPR joint sessions in Limerick.
Oh,
Yeah.
And then I didn't do anything for maybe 10 years. And I think that slowed me down because people might know you a little bit through what you write and everything else, but they don't know you. And I think that if I'd had my time again, because they're relatively short times away from home, most of us do. I was a single parent then, but I had mum who could come and do it and did it from time to time. I think that you could live off, once you've got a network established and you've been to a few you can live off that for a bit. But I think it's quite hard to make up for lost ground if you've had a big, long period. But I think you just really be really judicious and just really think very hard to yourself, what am I likely to get out of this? What's the quality of the conference? How important is it for the things that I'm interested in? What are the likely leads I'm going to get? What are the likely collaborations I'm going to get? And I just think always weigh those things up. But I do think getting it going in the first place, because networks grow, there's then relationships that you can maintain in other ways. But
it can be really confronting. I remember going to my first American Political Science Association meeting, and I went to the women's, the social event, and I knew no one. And I remember going and I was starstruck because there were all these people that, Druda was there and Mary Katzenstein and Pippa Norris and all these people, and I sort of walking around looking at them saying, oh. And in the end I just left of the room and I left. And it took me like another couple of conferences, and I think for me I wish I had have just had a little bit more confidence to go up and introduce myself, even if I just had introduced myself and left. But at that stage I just sort of did the lap. But those things can be really confronting the first couple of times around, I think.
Just on that point, UCC do a lot of training for postdocs, and one of the best training I ever did was a networking training session by a guy called Will Kintish, if it ever comes up again, and he shows you how to work a room.
How do you?
Come
on, Will.
I wish I know. Well, basically you look at the way people are standing, and if they're standing sort of like that, that's an invitation to. Women tend to face on one another, and if you're a single person, it's what you said about you circle the room and then left.
Yeah.
So the way to break into a room where you don't know anybody and they're all standing like this is to find the wallflower and go up and talk to them.
Right.
And then you say to the wallflower, will we go and join? When there's two of you, it's easier.
Yeah.
And you go and join, people who are like this, and then you can leave, because you can't really walk away from someone who's on their own.
Yeah.
So you basically have to join a group in order for you to leave.
Yeah. Right.
And something as basic as that,
Yeah.
when you go into a situation where you really don't know anybody and you're trying to look confident, you just make for the toilet. So that's if you come across the training, Will Kintish networking, how to network. It's really very valuable.
paid for that.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well paid for that.
Will's agent here, yeah.
I mean, I'd force myself to talk to at least 3 people that I don't know.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah.
And he actually gives you opening lines.
Oh,
Where
is this now?
Your icebreaker.
There was a question at the back, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. Because I remember I went to UCP's Lausanne, and there was Shireen Rai and all of these people I read about, and Shireen came and talked to me, and I felt like, oh, you connected with me.
That's so
and
great.
today as well, It was so nice to actually read people and then meet. No, that wasn't the question. I wanted to know more about Finn actually, because my PhD was on masculinism in Indian politics, and I want to now move on to look specifically at how casteism and masculinism works in the health sector. So I was just curious about how I can get more involved, or how to how is there a formal way?
Yeah, just email us. The website needs to be redeveloped.
Yeah. Yes.
So it's a bit moribund, the website at the moment, because there's no secretariat. It's an informal network, except less powerful. We have no Sherpas.
Exactly.
And just look out. So just get in touch. Get in touch.
Yeah.
And Ellen Bjarnagard would be a really good person for you to speak to. She does a lot of stuff about clientelism.
Sorry?
Ellen, and then do I pronounce it right? Bjarnagard.
Yeah.
Bjarnagard. She's at Uppsala,
Yeah.
and she does a lot of work on clientelism
In Thailand and in Asia.
on social capital.
If you email me, I'll give all the details.
But that's really exciting, because one of the challenges we've had, and also one of the critiques work of Finn, is that it's been very northern centric, and I don't like that description because it doesn't fit. When you come from Australia and New Zealand, you're still part of the north, but you're really, really south. But I think the work I've just started doing in Vietnam has shown me how this can travel, but we still don't know what the limits of it are and what we have to supplement it with in different contexts. Because we're talking about advanced economies and advanced democracies and, democracies in retreat or whatever it might be, but it'd be fantastic to have more. We've had publications on Bangladesh, right, in Georgina's informed, Thailand, but it's been predominantly the usual suspects.
Europe and North America.
And the perspectives are mostly gender and, if at all, then class. But there are other factors which I think religion, for example,
Absolutely.
how
It's an intersectional approach.
Exactly.
I think there's the two things. I think it's the different context, but also the intersectionality. We've been very focused on gender, and the intersectionality needs to come in. But I don't think all of us actually know how to do it quite. So very happy to have more work in that field.
I'll email you.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Yeah,
Great.
Yeah.
Yvonne, can you tell us about the very exciting news about these women-only professorships that have been introduced in Ireland?
Okay. It is absolutely a very exciting initiative. And if I'm reading kind of more wider and bigger patterns, I think Ireland is probably going to be at the forefront of a wave of these that are going to come along in other countries. I think it was interesting that Eindhoven made an announcement last week in a different context, but the same idea. As gender and politics scholars, for us, I think these are really, really interesting posts. So they're Senior Academic Leadership Initiative. Is the scheme. 45 posts that are intended to bring women either through internal or through an external route into senior decision making in the higher education sector in Ireland over the next 3 years. So approximately 15 posts a year is kind of the nutshell of it. The Department of Education and the HEA have committed to fund these posts at that senior leadership level, i.e. professorship or senior lecturer 3, which is the professorship equivalent in the technology sector. They will fund them for 10 years, and the university then takes that responsibility over after the 10 years. So the university cannot have it for the 10 years and then not continue the commitment. So the first call is out now, and it's going to be very challenging on all institutions to bid for these posts. It's going to be a two-stage process whereby, first of all, the university or institutes of technology, I'm just going to say university for short, a university bids for up to 3 of these posts. So even though there might be 15 on offer, you can't bid for 15. You bid for a maximum of 3. At least that's how we understand it. And the university has to define what these 3 posts are that it's putting in. So the university might say, well, we want to bring in somebody that will lead our research, our world-leading research on molecular biology, for example. And it will be Sally post in microbiology, leading a research institute, for example. So something like that. The HEA will then submit all of these requests, applications from higher education institutions to an international panel. The international panel will come back and say to the HEA, well, we think that maybe these 15 are worthy of being funded, they are really meet all the criteria. It's all fairly clear what the criteria, the marking score is, and only then can the university institute then advertise for those posts. But let's say, for example, Technological University Dublin submitted for 3 posts. It might only get 1. And it would be told which one.
Yeah.
And therefore it could then go and apply and advertise in the usual way. So there is that kind of check in the system. I was on the working group that prepared this proposal, and it became very clear very quickly that the HEA and the Department of Education wanted to ensure that 1 or 2 universities did not capture all of the posts. So there is a commitment to disperse them around the sector, but that doesn't mean that they're still not going to be highly competitive. So institutionally they'll be highly competitive, as well as highly competitive once they're advertised. Don't know if that's...
Yeah. I mean, I can just add a little bit to that from UCC's perspective. So obviously this has been something that's taken the attention of senior management, and there's a debate going on, I think, currently over which 3 proposals will go forward from UCC, and each of the colleges was invited to submit up to 3 ideas. So I consulted with colleagues in the schools, and we've submitted 2 proposals from this college. Whether either will get into the final 3 of the UCCs, that we don't know, and then obviously beyond that we don't know what will happen either. But it is, it's certainly a very exciting initiative. I guess one of the things I've heard, which I'd be interested to know what you think about this, is will there be difficulties in guaranteeing recruitment to a specific named position? So let's say you have a professor of molecular biology advertised at UCC, what will be the field? And then will you actually get your first rank candidate? Because one of the challenges I guess we have sometimes, I've sat now and chaired a number of professorial panels here, so we don't always get our first rank candidate. And so there's a little bit of concern, I think, from the institution there over, will we end up with 1 or 2 or 3 of these, and then will we be able to fill those posts? So I guess we just don't know how that's going to work through yet.
Yeah, I think every institution is going to have those concerns, in fact, and you allude also to the fact that internally it's a competitive process also. and it has to be backed by data.
Yeah.
You know, it just can't be a nice wishful thought. It actually has to be backed by data.
So is there a sense that also strategically you're looking at the places where you would expect there to be more women, like molecular biology, for example, and you're therefore seeking to do that, or is it just a blanket that each institution will say, hey, we would like to invest in these areas?
Yeah, it's the institution decides where they want to focus on, and these posts have to be aligned with the strategic priorities of the institution as well.
Well, one of the problems with that is, of course, it would be great to have lots of gender politics posts, but if they're not part of the strategic plans of any universities.
Well, there actually is scope within this. They're deliberately called Senior Academic Leadership Initiative for a reason. And the reason is that they don't have to be confined to academic posts. They are senior leadership posts. So if one wanted to bring in, let's say, a vice president for equality and diversity, one could do that, and that person may or may not have a track record. But you know, so, or it could be maybe a leader around teaching and community engagement, for example. You know, it all depends on the university, so it's not specifically confined to academic roles.
So I don't want to hog the floor, but I mean, one of the, from a UK perspective, you'd be going, positive discrimination, this will be illegal. How can this possibly get through either domestic or European legislation? So how have you navigated that legal minefield?
Oh, yes. Well, the Attorney General has done it for us. There is a paragraph that has been that comes directly from the Attorney General.
And that's kind of what, time limited, grounds of seed, or what, how are they doing it? They're just saying it's all right to.
No, they're. I mean, we can share this. This is up on the HEA website, but it basically says, first of all, that anybody can apply for these positions, and also that that these positions are open. A university can make a case for a position for anybody under the legislation, the protected grounds in the legislation. So the university, if the university, for example, wanted to bring a male traveller to a senior leadership role of some kind, then the university would develop a case to that end. And that would be open for women to apply as well. But the university would say, well, we want to appoint a male traveller to this one. Just as an example. That's an extreme example, but it has been Attorney General proofed more than once. More than once, let me assure you.
So it might well then, if it works, spread throughout the rest of the EU then.
Yeah.
I will take the lead again.
Of course. Oh my God.
We won't be bothered with that sort of nonsense post-Brexit.
Well, on that happy note, please show your appreciation to the
So I just, it falls to me just to say a few thank yous. So the first thanks I want to say is to everyone who turned up today to hear our speakers and to engage with us and spend time with us, because I know everyone is so busy with everything that we're all doing, research and commitments in life. So thank you all for taking time out to travel to Cork to be with us today. I want to thank my speakers. They've come from near and far, so we've had a fantastic day, I think, of engagement, very interesting contributions. I think we've all taken away some tips from today's conversation. And personally, I must say thank you to all of you, because you've all been sponsors and mentors and friends of mine throughout the last number of years of my own profession. I want to also say thank you to our chairs who did a marvellous job, and they're my female colleagues here from the Department of Government and Politics, so thanks for the support and chipping in today. Also, I really need to, and we really do need to acknowledge the work of Steffi and Kasia and Irene, who've literally administered this conference, and they've been in touch with all of you for the last number of weeks and months, and they pulled together everything, so a big thanks to them. I also just want to thank our funders, because we had a number of people who helped us out with this. So the PSAI gave us funding, so we want to acknowledge and thank that. CACSSS gave us funding, the college here gave us funding through its conference fund, the Department of Government and Politics and the Australian Human Rights Institute as well. So we had funding from different sources to make today possible, so that was good. And I also want to just say a few words of, I suppose, acknowledgement and congratulations. Firstly to Councillor Colette Finn, who was a founding member. With me and others of the 50-50 group back in 2010, and no better woman to put into practice what she preached, and she put herself forward for election this time and got elected in the most recent local elections for the Green Party in Cork City Council. And on a day where we're talking about women in academia, I want to say and acknowledge and congratulate my two colleagues, Doctors Teresa Reedy and Mary C. Murphy, on your recent promotion. It's been fantastic. Long overdue and well deserved. So on that note, thank you so much, and I'm conscious there's my Australian visitors and my Manchester visitor. You have a flight to catch, I think, and there's taxis waiting for you, so we'll wrap it up there, and thanks again for everything.